Have you seen the t-shirts with people's names on them in a vertical row, and then you kind of have to guess who the group of names is? Has anybody seen those? I've got a couple for you to guess. This one says Washington, Adams, Jefferson, and Madison. Who are they? Anybody know? Matt says Chicago street names. Also, some presidents, turns out. All right, skipping ahead a little bit in history, John, Paul, George, and Ringo. Who's that? The Beatles, lovely. Who is Rachel Ross, Monica Chandler, Phoebe, and Joey? Friends, you got it again. All right, one generation younger still. This one might be trickier. Mike, Lucas, Dustin, 11, and Will. And Will is upside down, if that gives you a hint. Stranger Things. Congratulations, you're young. These shirts, I think, are kind of cool. Sometimes I see one in the grocery store and I think, okay, do I know who that list of names is? Can I figure it out? Most of the times I can, but sometimes they get a little niche and I'm not sure. But that's partly now because on Etsy you can get your family's names on them. Like mine would say Lauren, Daniel, Abby, Cy. So it's very possible that when I'm at Jewel staring at people and I'm like gawking and it's just a shirt from their family reunion and I'm like, is that a band? Are those characters from a novel? Maybe they're the original Supreme Court justices. I can't tell. Most of the time, though, the names are familiar enough that I can figure it out. Now, I have yet to see a shirt like this with the 12 tribes of Israel. It very well may be out there, but I haven't seen it yet. I suspect that, however, a lot of people would look at it and they first might go, huh? But then, if they think about it, they'll get it. Christians, Jews, Muslims, historians, anthropologists, religious scholars, all sorts of people would know these names and would recognize them on a shirt at Jewel, because these are big names. These are the names of the forefathers of Israel, the children of Jacob, the people who moved to Egypt and bring their families, and they settle with their brother Joseph in a time of famine. All of this is happening at the end of Genesis. That happens right before the readings that Cindy started for us today. And these are the names who go on to multiply greatly in the face of adversity. And later in the Bible, they have prestigious professions within the community. These are big names. And the phrase, "these are the names," is what starts the story of Exodus. Everyone thousands of years ago who heard this story recited aloud, right off the bat, they would know who these names are, which is why the Hebrew title of the book of Exodus, they don't call it Exodus, it's Shemot, which means names. Joseph, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. These are famous, important names. They are now, and they were 3,000 plus years ago. But right away, in the first chapter of Exodus, the author grabs our attention by listing these names and then saying in verse 8, "But a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph." It's their way of saying these important names, the ones you recognize, the ones that you thought were going to be big in the story, I listed them because I know you'd know them, but now I'm changing it. No. In the land of Egypt, they have been forgotten. Or perhaps better said, the king has forgotten these names and these people. And that's all it takes for the persecution of the Israelite people to begin. First, by the order of the king, the Israelites become enslaved. They are forced to build cities on their backs, all sorts of other heavy labor. And when that punishment doesn't wear the Hebrews down, the king decrees something worse. All male Hebrew children should be killed as soon as they are born. And when that Doesn't work. The people are still growing in numbers. The king rules that Hebrew baby boys should be drowned in the Nile. It's a gruesome situation. And if we pause here and think, imagine for a second that you don't know the rest of the story, or perhaps this is your first time hearing it. If we pause and think, who will help these people? Who will God send? And then we make a list of people in our minds, names of people that we would expect to help, the names of people from powerful heritage, names that the Israelite community in Egypt would know, even if the king has forgotten. Who will God send? We might end up with a list of names that looks a lot like this. These are the names, right? These are the people we would expect God to send in and free the Israelites from their pain. Surely these names and all of their descendants are God's go-to helpers. But friends, this is not the shirt that God is wearing at the Jewel. This is Shiphrah and Puah. Shiphrah and Puah. Who are they? Nobody knows their names. They're just two midwives, two women. Nobody recognizes them. What can they do? Quite a bit. Between the two of these women, these midwives defy the king's ruling and manage to safely deliver baby boys to their parents. And when the king calls them out and says, hey, how come the Israelites' numbers are still growing? Are you not doing exactly what I told you to do? They come up with a cover so good that they are not only spared their lives, but they are able to continue working as midwives in their community. Oh, the Hebrew women just give birth so fast, we don't even make it. By the time we're there, the baby's out. We read in verse 20, the Israelite people multiplied and became very strong, even stronger than before the king's persecution began. But there's more. God's t-shirt of helpers doesn't stop with Shiphrah and Puah. We have to add Moses' mom, which ironically for this sermon is not named in this part of the story. But she is later on in chapter 6, Jochebed. Rolls off the tongue. Jochebed is a Levite woman, no particular importance, but she has a fierce love for her child. And she also figures out a way around the king's ruling. She hides her son for 3 months and then using her smarts to rig up a waterproof baby raft out of a basket. Now please note what the scripture does and does not say about the basket with the baby. This is one of the things that we're going to have to dwell on as we read through Exodus. There's a lot in our minds that happens in the story of Exodus, but if you slow down and read, does the baby float down the river? This is from the Prince of Egypt, if that's your generation. No, the baby does not float down the river. Does Jochebed cast him off into the current, hoping for the best? 10 Commandments, anyone? Is that your generation? Okay. No, Jochebed does not. She hides the baskets in the reeds on the riverbank and plants the baby's older sister there to keep an eye on him. And people are creatures of habit, so Jochebed picks a spot where she knows the rich royal Egyptians, the daughter of Pharaoh no less, the daughter of the same king who is ruling, who says these are the babies that should be murdered. Jochebed knows where she comes to take a bath, and that is where she plants the baby, knowing that Pharaoh's daughter will have a soft spot. Brilliant. Which brings us to the next person on the list of name, Moses' sister. Again, we learn her name later. It's Miriam. Miriam is a kid, a little girl. And she has the guts to suggest to Pharaoh's daughter, hey, that looks like a cute baby. You're not gonna want to stay up all night with that baby though. I could go find someone who could nurse the baby for you. Can I help you? And Pharaoh's daughter is like, that's a great idea. Yes. So Miriam goes to get her mother, the mother of Moses, Jochebed, who then gets to spend more time with her own child, and she gets paid to do it. Double brilliant. Considering the odds that they were facing in the Egyptian empire, who would have thought that a little girl could bring a family together like this? Who would have thought that a normal woman with no special pedigree or education or power could be bold enough to devise a plan to help her child live in defiance of the corrupt laws? Who would have thought that the Hebrew midwives would subversively fight against the king and then help the growth of their nation? Who would have thought that this is the list of names that starts the book of Exodus? That these are the names of God's helpers, the people who come to the aid of the oppressed, that these are the names of the ones that God sends. And that's exactly the point of this opening section. This list of women prepares us for something that we will see again and again and again in the book of Exodus. God calls people that we would never expect to read on t-shirts at the Jewel. God calls people who don't have big, important names or titles, who aren't well known. God calls regular people alongside Asher and Dan and Levi and Reuben, the big names. God calls everyone to help free people, to help call out rulers who are corrupt, to bring families together, to feed people, and to create a just world. God calls everyone. And like a crazy pastor, did I shove everyone's name on a shirt? You bet I did. Because God calling leaders and faithful people is not just a thing that happens in Exodus, it is happening now. You are on God's list of names. These are the names that God is calling to do the work of faith, to help free people, to call out rulers who are corrupt, to bring families together, to feed people, to create a just world. God is calling you and the person next to you and the person across the aisle. God is calling kids and those who are wise in years. God is calling new members and families who have been here for generations and people who are here for the first time. God is calling you like God called Shiphrah and Puah and Jochebed and Miriam. And if you need a little convincing, consider this. The most surprising person God calls is someone without a fancy Hebrew name, a person who will come to have a history of violence and run away from their country and their consequences, a person who stutters when they speak and is doubtful about their abilities, a person who is not raised to believe in God, but comes to their faith later on, a person with an Egyptian name raised by an Egyptian princess. Moses. If God calls Moses, certainly God is calling you. I could keep going and going and going, but I will end by saying this. Keep coming this summer. Journey through Exodus and see how your calling from God might unfold alongside the story of Moses' calling from God. And remember, if you think that your name is one that no one would recognize on the shirt, think again. God knows your name, and you are on God's list of names. Amen.